No, you don't need to do anything. There we go. So it's up and running, Dave. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks very much, Derek, and good to see so many people here tonight. Before I start, I'd just like to say that don't be shy making any constructive comments or asking questions, obviously, and giving any tips that you might have. I'm really keen to learn, come away from this session learning quite a bit myself. So please do offer your own tips and advice as we go along. So I thought I'd start off with some flies I've been using recently. I was just saying to the guys here that because of the warm temperatures and the lack of rain, I've not been fishing the rivers very much over the last month, and I've been travelling up to Wales, fishing some of the upland lakes that are much cooler. Fishing very well actually at the moment. So I thought I'd tie a couple of flies to start off that's really worth taking up there if you're ever popping up to fish the wild lakes of Wales. So the first one is my version of really popular fly, Claret Dabbler. Everyone probably is familiar with this fly. It's very widely used for wild trout across the British Isles. So this is my version of it. I've got a size 12 barbless wet fly hook in the vise. I tend to favour a size 14 for fishing this fly actually, which might seem a bit small for a lot of lake anglers. I tend to find I get a better strike rate and hookup rate from the trout, because I do think that this fly works really well when you've got a hatch of those claret dun olives on the water. That seems to be when the trout really like this fly, and the size of those is quite small. So unless it's blowing a gale and it's really choppy on the surface, I tend to favour this fly in a smaller size, and perhaps on the same cast fish something else, perhaps a bob fly that's a little bit bigger, just to attract the trout. But I'll tie it on a size 12 here because it's easier to see on the screen. So I've got black thread. This is Fish On Ultimate Tying Silk. It's the thread that I like to use as standard. Very strong silk thread. So just put in a layer of that down the hook and back up again. And then one of the core materials for a dabbler is bronze mallard feather. So take a decent bit of bronze mallard, and for the tail, what I tend to do is favour the finer fibres just towards the tip of the feather. So you've got two sides to a mallard feather. You've got the one side with short, very pale fibres. They're no use for most flies. What you're really looking for is the bronze, longer feathers here. So I tend to go for the tails towards the tip of the feather, where you've got straighter and thinner fibres, and just select a small bunch of those, making sure that the tips are all level with each other. And then offer that up to the hook, and measuring about the same length as the hook shank from the eye to the curve. That will be the length of the tail, and then just tie that in with a sort of pinch and loop, and then tighter turns as you lock it in. And then back up again. Get rid of the waste. And then for the rib, I'm using fine red wire. This is a 0.04 gauge wire, just standard fine red wire. Just tie that in. And then for the body, what I'm going to use is a dark claret seals fur dubbing. This is all my seals fur here, all real seals fur. Really nice dark red wine coloured dubbing. This is one that is made by Rob Denson. I really do like his seals fur. It's got really nice rich colours to it. Take a decent pinch of that. Dub it onto the thread. I'm trying to create a tapered profile. I know it's technically a wet fly, this one, but I'm trying to go for the tapered profile that the natural olive has, and has quite a pronounced thorax to it. So once you got the dubbing on there, it just helps create that tapered profile. So we just go back up there, dubbing it. You'll see as I get towards the head, I'm just creating a slight thorax profile there. There we go. You can pull a few fibers out there, make it a bit leggy. Now the next stage is going in for the body hackle. This is just a claret Indian cock cape, not an expensive one, just a standard Indian cape. Just find a suitable sized feather. I'll just tie that in tightly. I'm just going to create a palmed hackle back down the hook. Fairly open turns on this one. So I'll aim for, on a size 12 hook, 5 turns of the hackle as you go down, and then I'll follow that back up with five turns of the rib, and it just keeps it profile nice, and it keeps it nice and neat when you rib it. Okay, so that's 5 turns of the hackle, and then coming back the other way with the rib to lock in the hackle there. You probably know these techniques anyway, but if you do find you're trapping a few hackles as you go along the way, just giving a little wobble from side to side just helps tease the feathers out and loosen any trapped ones. And then just tie off the rib nice and securely. Snap off the excess. There we go. So we've got the body hackle tied in there. The next step, I think this is probably the little touch that makes this fly, this version of the Dabbler, a little bit unique. just taking a bit of red holographic tinsel. This is the fine gauge one. Nice and shiny. What I'll do is I'll take that one strand, fold it over in half, creating a loop. Get the ends to match up. So you can see there we've got a loop of fine holographic tinsel. And then I'll tie that in just behind the head and just arrange the two fibers so they're on either side of the hook. So a bit like tying in buzzer cheeks, I suppose. There's a very loose pinch and loop, and then tightening up to lock it in. Cut that excess off there. So we've got this loop of holographic hanging behind the fly. And I'll just leave that there for now. I won't touch that until the very end. Then it's time for another hackle. Slightly longer hackle than the previous one for going in at the front. That'll do. I'll pull off a fair bit of the soft bit at the end there, so we've got nice stiff fibers ready to go. And now I'll just create a few turns at the head end. So you're looking at 4, sometimes 5 turns. So that'll do, that's 4 turns there, and I'll just tie that in with 3 turns there. Securing that hackle. And just tie back any loose fibers. So you notice I've left a fair bit of gap there between the dressing that I've done and the head. That's because it gives a bit of room for the wing to go in over the top and to create a neat head. So we go back to the same piece of bronze mallard, and I'll then go for the fibers that are the longer fibers, the darker fibers that are below the ones I've selected for the tail. And I'll take a good pinch of those, probably about just over a centimetre, probably about a metre and a half width of fibres from this feather, making sure that they're all as straight as possible at the ends. So you got this nice clump of bronze mallard here. What I'll do is I'll put that over the top of the fly, holding the bunch fairly flat, so it's lying flat between my finger and thumb. This is the really crucial part of dabblers. It's getting the proportions right of the wings. It's very, very easy to make a dabbler look wrong because you've either got a much too longer wing over it or you've got a too short one. So it's quite crucial, this bit. What I tend to do is measure it by taking the tip of the wing halfway between the end of the hook, the bend of the hook, and the tail. That tends to work as a good rule of thumb, I think, for these types of flies. So push that down flat with your thumb over the top of the hackle with the head. And then this is the tricky bit. You try and fold the fibers around the head of the fly and then tie it in with a very loose pinch and loop, tightening up to lock it in. Nice and tight there. So we get that cloaked appearance on the wing. Like to have a nice wing shape over the top and then cloaking fibers going all around the side of the hook. Trim that off as close as possible. Sometimes difficult to get a really neat head at first, but we can rectify that later. Good pair of sharp scissors is very useful for this stage to get a really close cut when it comes to those stray fibers. So at this point you can manipulate the wing and the cloaking hackle to get the profile that you like. That looks about right. And then it's a case of just tying it off nice and neat at the head. There we go, and then you can use your whip finish, or I tend to like to use just a pen to create that multiple half hitch. And then that pen just helps push all the fibers back, the hackles and the wing, and you get a lovely tight tie-off point at that head. Trim off the thread. And the very last bit is this loop of holographic that we've got hanging out the back. So what I'll do there is I'll just pull hold the loop at the end, move the scissors down to the length I want them, which is just short of the length of the wings, and then chop it off. And you've got two very fine strands of red holographic embedded within the hackles and also the wings on either side of the fly, just to give it that little bit of flash, very, very subtle. It does seem to work. You know, I found this fly noticeably more effective than some of the other versions of the dabblers that I've used. I find that sometimes they're either too flashy, using all that straggle string and UV stuff, or they don't have enough flash in them. But this one seems to be just hit the spots, and it's been working really well.
Hey, what position do you fish that on?
Say that again, sorry.
What position on the line do you fish that point, middle, top?
I tend to use it as a middle dropper fly,
Right.
but it does work good as a point fly as well, particularly if the claret duns they're on the water.
Okay, thank you.
You can also, because it's quite a bushy fly, you can effectively grease this up with mucilin or some other water repellent and fish it right on the surface. And that, in some conditions, that's the best way to do it. Otherwise, you know, sat in the water like a traditional wet fly.
Okay. Very good.
They're interesting flies, dabblers, because they don't look like anything obvious. They don't sort of close copy imitate anything, and they don't really look like those claret duns that you see on the water. These look a bit more bushy, but they do, when you fish them on the water, the trout do really go for them in an olive hatch. And I just wonder whether it's because with all these all this long wings and hackles and sort of leggy parts, it looks like a drowned or a crippled olive on the water that's got all mangled up, and the fish, you know, choose that one because it's an easy prey to take. I find sometimes these flies work more effectively in an olive hatch than if you fish a much more imitative pattern, like a CDC olive or something, you tend to find the fish so many hatching that they don't tend to go for your fly, whereas they will move and take a dabbler.
Very underestimated dabblers are.
Yeah. I mean, I've only talked about the claret one here, Derek, and it's not. I don't fish many other variations, but I know, the silver dabblers, and the other colours, they're all really effective in different conditions. And I must admit, I haven't had a chance to fish all the different varieties of dabblers, but just wonder whether they do imitate such a wide range of different insects during the course of a season. It's why they're so effective.
Well, if you've got a pattern that's working, why change it?
Yeah. The other one I'm going to tie now is for fishing in the same lakes. This is a variation of a really, really well-known, well-used traditional Welsh pattern, which imitates the beetles that hatch in the Welsh hills earlier in the year, June typically. There were quite a few around in early July this year, actually. But the Coch-y-Bonddu beetle is very widespread, very common in Wales. It's a terrestrial beetle that gets blown onto the surface of the water. And when it does, the fish really home in on it and go on a feeding frenzy sometimes. So it's a really important fly to have, particularly during June. Do find that the trout will take it. At other times of year, they seem to not forget what a lovely, tasty meal that this beetle is. So you can fish it at other times, and it's really, really effective. So this is my latest version that I've used this season, and it's been really effective. Same hook as the dabbler. This is a size 12 barbless hook. It's actually a fish on brand wet and dry hook, they call it. So it's like a light gauge wet fly hook. Same thread again. This is the.
Would you normally tie it on that size, Dave?
Yeah, this size 12 or size 14, Adam.
Yeah.
It's not a small beetle.
No.
I tend to tie it a little bit shorter on a size 12, so it's not. It doesn't cover the whole hook, which I'll do here.
Okay.
But that slightly larger hook is quite good for improving the hookup rate. So when you're fishing it, particularly in windy conditions, as you know, these trout, when you hook them, they go absolutely ballistic and leap into the air and all sorts, and they can very often throw hooks straight away. So the slightly larger hook here might just help give that better hook hold at the on the take.
Yeah.
So this is the same ultimate tying silk which you can get from the Fish On website. One of the main features of this fly that I like is gold holographic. This is medium-sized gold holographic tinsel.
Right.
What I'll do with this is tie it in at the back of the fly to create a butt end to it. We go down to around about level with the bend of the hook, and then come back up with overlapping turns of this. So almost halfway up, back up the hook, and then just tie that off. And then what I'll do is I'll create a shell back for the beetle in the natural colour, which is the natural Coch-y-Bonddu beetle has a nice chocolate brown wing case to it. A lot of the commercially available versions of this fly quite often use black foam, similar to other floating foam beetles, and I'm sure the fish don't actually take much notice of the colour, to be honest with you, especially when you're fishing a fly in the surface. It's silhouetted against the sky, but I just like to use a more natural looking brown foam for this particular fly. And I'll cut off a section about 4 millimeters thick, and then at one end just create a little triangle. That will be the tying in point on the hook. So I'll tie that in just on top of that holographic, not going all the way back down the hook, because as I said just earlier, I'm going to tie this fairly short so it's the right size to mimic the natural, but it's got a slightly larger hook there to improve hook hold when the fish takes, and it provides a little gold flash at the butt end there, which gives the fly a little bit more attraction to the fish. So the next stage is to create the body, which is a dubbed body. I use 2 different types of dubbing for this one mixed together. Again, going back to the seal's fur, choosing just a standard black seal's fur there. Take a good pinch of that. And then I'll mix that with a bit of sparkle. This is a Hen's Spectra dub. This, if you're interested in which particular one it is, this is number 392 in the Spectra range. It's a nice sort of iridescent green with bits of looks like it's got a bit of UV flash in there as well. But if you look at these natural beetles, they do have a green iridescent sheen to them on their body. So mixture of seal's fur and the flash gives a nice sort of realistic looking body. Of course, the seal's fur is great for these wet flies and dry flies because it sheds water easily, and it's more buoyant than just using a pure synthetic dubbing. Because this is a fly that the beetles sit on the surface, they fall on the water. They might sink and be taken under the surface sometimes, but they generally just sit on the surface and float around. So that's where we want to keep this fly when we're fishing. So dubbing quite a thick rope onto this because it's quite a fat bodied beetle. So don't be afraid to put a good chunk of dubbing on there. And then it's a case of creating that slightly rounded, bulbous looking body. And then I'm going to put some legs in. These are knotted pheasant tails, the sort of things you use for dry daddies or hoppers. Take a bunch of 6 of these. Doesn't really matter exactly. The natural has 6 legs, so that's why I've gone for 6. The trout can't count how many legs, but gives enough that if you lose a few legs after a few fish, that you've still got some there to give it that realistic impression. So just preparing those legs and making sure they're all lined up nicely. And I'm going to put those over the top of that dub body and arrange the legs if I can. So there's an equal number on each side of the body. I'm not going to make those legs too long because the beetles don't have really, really long legs, but it can create a good trigger feature. So exaggerating them slightly, making them a little bit longer than the natural beetle, makes them a bit more mobile in the water, and it probably just creates a little extra trigger for the trout. So you know, it's not a hopper or a daddy long legs, but it's making it just a little bit longer so they stick out. Is whether it makes a difference to the fish or whether it makes a difference to my confidence when I'm fishing the fly, I don't really know.
As long as it works.
Yeah, that's right. So I don't know if you can see that. There's those legs very easily there. But I've got 3 on each side. Chop the waists. And I'm also going to put a hackle in as well. This is a nice brown, standard brown cock hackle. The traditional Coch-y-Bonddu pattern uses this colour. I'm just going to select a hackle that isn't too long, but it just helps with a bit of buoyancy, creates more of an impression of legs. Tie the hackle in just behind the head, nice and tight. And then I'm going to give it 3 or 4 turns of hackle. That'll do. 3 turns there. Trim it off. Neaten up that head. Tie any stray bits of hackle backwards. Make sure the legs are still aligned nicely to the side. And then it's simply a case of taking that foam and just folding it over the top of the fly and pulling it slightly tight, not too tight because the foam can snap quite easily, either at this stage or if there's too much tension in it. You sometimes find after a few casts or a fish, the foam goes ping, and then you can't use the fly anymore. So I tie it in not too tight, is the best way I can describe it. So holding that tag, tying in there at just behind the head, and then this is the bit that creates that sort of nice beetly looking profile. I'll chop it off, not right down to the stalk. I'll leave a little bit sticking up because the beetle itself, if you look at it, it's got this bulbous looking thorax, and then it's got quite a rectangular shaped thorax to it and quite a wide head. So this bit of foam here we can use to just give that impression of the beetle's head without going too over the top. You can see there, if you look at it from the top there, you've got this little stub of foam. And you can round the edges off a little bit there. It also makes it really nice to form the head, because what I'll do is I'll just now finish it right behind that bit of foam, so it creates a nice little point to lock your thread in. And to tie off, with nothing interfering with the eye of the hook there, so the eye is nice and exposed, easy to thread. So there we go, that's my latest version of the Coch-y-Bonddu, which caught a lot of trout this year in June and early July.
Nice.
The foam sheet I'm using is 2 millimeters thick, I should have said. So it gives it just enough buoyancy to keep it up in the water. You know, I'm not relying on thick hackle to keep it up. One thing I do sometimes do is add a bit of mucilin to the top half, because sometimes after a few casts or a few fish, that this foam becomes quite porous, and you do tend to find it will take up some water and start to sink. So a bit of mucilin over the back there just helps keep it nice and high in the water.
David,
Yeah.
for an option for anybody really, my tying of that type of beetle many years ago, I was taught to use a peanut shell. Exactly,
right.
Exactly the same as you was with the studding and the legs. But I take a peanut shell from what we give the blue tits, cut it in half with a Stanley knife, make a V, super glue it onto the top, and then paint it with a marker pen. And you can paint it black, brown, put eyes on it, whatever you want to do.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
Something different.
Yeah. See if I can get the camera resolution's not particularly great, but hopefully you can see the main features.
Yeah, no.
Like the shape of that.
That's really nice, Davey, that.
I've never used this in other places, but it might even work on a river as a general beetle pattern. But it certainly works on the upland lake trout. What I'll tend to do with this one is fish it on the point. So it sort of fishes right on the point, keeps the rest of the cast up in the water as well. And I might even put one of those dabblers in the middle, and then something more bushy on the top. Or if the beetles are really on the water, you might want to fish 2 or 3 of those. And it's not unusual to get 2 or 3 trout hooked up at the same time if they're really feeding hard. The last day, the most memorable day recently I've had with fishing Coch-y-Bonddu was on Lake Vyrnwy, and it was a really hot day in June a few years ago, and the conditions were just right, and these beetles just suddenly appeared on the water near the edges, and the fish just came out of all over the place, and it was amazing sport. So it's one of those flies that it's always good to have with you if you're fishing these wild lakes, because you never know when the beetle's going to appear and the fish are going to suddenly decide that they're going to lock onto the beetle. Okay, so perhaps move on to something slightly different now, and turn the attention back to the rivers. So I'm going to tie a nymph pattern. It's weighted pattern for fishing down in the water in the rivers. And this time of year, caddis flies form a really large part of trout's diet, because they're quite active, hatching and breeding at the moment. So the trout do feed a lot on the caddis pupae that are transforming from the larvae at the bottom of the river to the adults that emerge on the surface. And the pupal stage is a vulnerable stage for the insect, because they essentially have to move from the refuge of the stones and the gravel at the bottom of the river where they've been hiding away, and essentially launch themselves into the water column. And combination of swimming as hard as they can and also filling themselves up with gas, they move to the surface and get to the side of the river where they can crawl out, and then turn into the adults. So when trout see these pupae, they tend to see them as a really easy food source, but a very protein, energy rich food source as well. So they're good flies to use. So I've got a curved hook here. This is again my favorite brand, Fish On. This is the Fish On curved hook, fine wire, and I've put a 3mm tungsten copper bead in there.
What size is the hook, Dave?
This is a size 12, Adam.
Okay.
Which, if you compare a size 12 in this type to, say, a size 12 in a fulling mill check nymph, which is quite similar, they're vastly different. This is similar to a size 16 fulling mill. So,
Right.
yeah, it's like a lot of these things that the number is not comparable really across brands, but for this particular brand, it's a size 12.
Yeah, cool.
And then for the thread, I'm going to use again the same ultimate tying silk. This time it's in yellow. Just tie that on there. And I'm going to create a rib for this fly. Now this is, should have said, this particular pattern was created by a chap called John Pearson, and he called it the JP Caddis pupa. This is my version of it. It's a very simple fly, but the bit that I've modified is the rib. So I'll just take you through that quite slowly. For the rib, I'm using ultra lace tubing. It's quite often used to create buzzer bodies. It's hollow tubing. This is an olive color, and it's 1mm diameter. And what I'll do there is take a strand of pearl mylar. This is the finest gauge of pearl mylar, number 16. And then what I do is I thread the strand of pearl mylar into the tube. So there we go, we got the tube with the pearl mylar inside, which creates a nice little pearl sheen, but it's more subtle than just using the mylar on its own, and it's also more robust as well. You can just use this on its own, but for river trouts, after 1 or 2 fish, it tends to get chewed up and snap off. Plus, I think that this this tubing gives it a nice profile and a slightly more subtle shine to it.
Where'd you get your hollow tubing from, Davey?
This is just Vineyards,
Vineyards.
and I bought it off eBay from somewhere, Derek. You can get it from quite a few places. Now, one of the things about Caddis pupae is that their profile is quite distinct. So unlike most of the nymphs that we imitate in our river fishing that have that classic tapered body, so going from thin at the back end to a more bulbous thorax, Caddis pupae particularly are almost in reverse. They have quite a bulbous back end, and it sort of tapers up to a much thinner thorax and head end. So you're going to be mindful of that throughout the whole tying process here to create that profile. So in aid of that, I'm going to start the tying of this rather thick rib material towards the back end of the hook. So rather than tying it from the head end and tying it all the way down, I'm going to start tying it in just near the bend of the hook. So that creates a bit of bulk on the underneath the fly towards the rear end. And I'm going to tie that in around the bend of the hook so we can create a nice curved body. Just trim off any waste bits. And I'm just going to find the dubbing. I know he's lying around somewhere on my desk. Here we go. I'm going to use very fine check nymph dubbing, it's called, and it's in a nice creamy yellow colour. I think this is Hen's brand. It's called check nymph dubbing. You can get it quite widely. Take a fairly large chunk of the dubbing because these caddis have quite thick, chunky bodies. And it's this stage, creating the dubbing rope, that's really key to getting the right profile to this fly. And it's one of the things that you often see with caddis patterns is not right. Sometimes they're either too thin or they're too tapered towards the back end. So with this fine dubbing, you can almost sculpt it onto the thread. Or just twisting it and pinching it. So you see that I've almost got a reverse tapered profile with that dubbing rope, and it's on quite thick as well. And I'm just going to then take that from the back up the fly. And touching turns. Just making sure that it's going on with the right profile. So there we go. You can probably see there that it's a, if you've ever seen a caddis pupa in the water or in a kick sample, it tends to have that typical profile, that hump, almost a humpback going to a slightly smaller front end. Now, I'm not really into creating realistic features on flies, or making them too imitative. I don't think that makes any difference to the fishing at all. In fact, it sometimes can be the opposite, because the way the fly behaves in the water and the way the fish see it can be really different to how we see it on our benches. But I really do believe that one of the things you've got to get right is the profile and the size and shape of that fly. Things like colour and detail features, I don't think really make any difference, but the profile of the fly, as well as how you present it in the water, I think are what triggers the fish to take it or not. So what I'll do at this point is just rough it up slightly with the dubbing brush before we go over with the ribbing. It just helps to loosen the body a bit to start creating that very sort of juicy bodied caddis fly. So I'm just going to give it a really light comb with the dubbing brush, just to create a little bit of fuzz. And you can also exaggerate some of the bulbous features of the fly at this stage as well, just by loosening the dubbing up. There we go. And then it's a case of ribbing the fly. So great thing about this tubing is it's really stretchy, and it's very, very hard to snap. It's extremely robust stuff. So you can really pull on it, and you can really tighten those turns of rib to create a lovely segmented body to this fly. So I don't mind if I put a turn in right at the very back end, and then I'm ribbing it fairly tightly and fairly closely, actually. So you've got this nice thick segmented look about the fly, that subtle pearly shine just inside. That's a good thing about these silk threads, is you can really tie these thick materials in very, very tightly without fear of the threads popping. So that's the body. And then I'll just go over again with the dubbing brush very gently and just rough it up slightly. I do think one of the keys to success of this fly is having a scruffy fly. In fact, John Pearson has said many times that this fly is more successful the rougher the better. So after a few fish, after it's been really battered up, it tends to become more effective. So thorax dubbing, this is natural grey squirrel. Take a pinch of squirrel dubbing. You could just as easily use hare's fur or rabbit or whatever you like, really. It doesn't really matter. And just tie that in just behind the bead. Good thing about squirrel is it's quite spiky, so you get these nice leggy features springing off it. I'm going to go in with a hackle. English partridge. It's good to get yourself a really nice, a really good quality English partridge cape. Regular viewers will know that I really do like a soft hackle on nymph patterns and subsurface patterns to create that movement and that illusion of legs. It's really important on this particular pattern. So finding a feather of the right length. Doesn't have to be too short for this one because the natural caddis has quite long legs at this stage, and it also has trailing antennae and wings as well at this stage. So it's good to have some sort of quite long sort of leggy features. So I'll prepare this partridge hackle in a similar way to how you would do if you were tying a traditional North Country spider. So first thing I'll do is take all the fibers off one side of this feather. You don't have to do this. I know a lot of tyers will, when tying these like larger nymphs, will just use the whole feather and just hackle it as normal. I just prefer to take the fibers off one side because it just gives a knee to hackle, and it helps the hackles fibers all line up nicely when you wind it round. So then, holding the feather at the very end, removed all the fibers off that one side. I'll then stroke all these feathers forward so they all stick up like that, and it creates a V between, almost like the tail that I've got at the end, and then those feathers that are sticking up, and it's the feathers that are sticking up that I'm going to form the hackle with. So I'll tie it in just behind the bead where that notch has been created. Trim off the end of the feather. And then just wind the hackle in behind the bead and in front of that squirrel that we've just dubbed in. As you wind it, you can stroke and pull back those fibers so they don't catch on each other. So you create a nice, fairly long partridge hackle, tying that in nice and tight. And then to finish the fly off, I'm going to go for some more squirrel dubbing and just put some more in just in front of that hackle there. There we go, whip finish, or similar to the tie off there. Then just finally go in with a dubbing brush or the needle and just tease out some fibers there, creating that really leggy sort of appearance to it. And there you go, it's really effective fly, this one, particularly in the summertime. They're very simple to tie as well.
Nice looking fly. Really nice.
Thank you. As I say, the only unique variations I can claim on this fly is the rib. So the tubing with the mylar thread or the mylar tinsel in the middle is the only modification. Apart from that, this is John Pearson's caddis. Really effective pattern.
What was the original dubbing, Dave?
The original dubbing was the same. The original rib was
Ruben Leslie, yes, what I meant, yeah, sorry.
yeah. It was a brown dubbing, a bit like this, but not tubing. So it was just a solid solid brown stretchy tubing,
Like a floss or something.
like a flat style tubing. Might have some in my box here.
I think it's a D-shaped flexi rib, isn't it? It's got a D-shaped profile to it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, you can get it in a round profile or a D-shaped profile. I think John actually prefers the round profile because you get a more of a you get more of an exaggerated rib feature on this one.
I notice you're not getting asked loads of questions, Davey.
I was thinking, and
We're all mesmerised.
I hope that's a good thing.
Lovely, lovely.
I'll move on then if there's no questions.
Yeah.
And I was going to tie a river dry fly now. It's another one that's
Just before you move on, Dave.
Yeah.
The normal question: how would you fish that last fly?
How would I fish this one?
Yeah.
Just in the same way as you'd fish other nymphs. So you could use you can fish these in pairs, two of them together on a French leader, or you can fish them underneath an indicator quite nicely.
Yeah.
I tend to tie these in two sizes, I suppose, for summer fishing. The 3mm bead is probably the most useful. At the moment, the rivers are really low, and I'd probably be using 2.5mm bead in on a size 14 version of this hook in low water conditions. But it's good to have different weights, so as you fish different sections of water with different speeds and depths, you can change the weight of the fly to make sure it's fishing at the right depth. So I'll move on to the next fly, which is a dry fly that fishes really well this time of year on rivers. It's also a caddis, so it's the adult stage of the fly that we've just tied, and this is a version of a caddis that I picked up last year. It's quite similar to a lot of other caddis patterns. The caddis patterns I tie and use tend to be the simplest that you can find, and I tend to not go for much variation in terms of fancy or complicated features, but this particular one caught my eye, and I have used it and found that it's noticeably successful this time of year. So I've got a dry fly hook, so it's the same brand as the hook that I've used throughout this demonstration. It's from Fish On. This is a barbless hook. This is what they call the dry fly hook. It's a slightly lighter wire version of the hook that I tied that dabbler and the Coch-y-Bonddu beetle on. Fine wire hook, but these really nice and strong. These hooks, I've never had one snap on me. This is a size 14. This fly I will tie from size 18 up to size 12, usually size 10, possibly on sort of perhaps some sort of continental rivers or really fast flowing upland rivers. But on the rivers around here, the smaller caddis seem to be more abundant and what the fish go for. So sizes 14 and below tend to be the right sort of sizes to match what's coming off on the rivers locally. So I've got silk thread again. This is yellow, just the same as before. Tie that in about halfway down the shank of the hook here, because you'll see why in a minute. This fly is it's a bit like tying a detached bodied fly, but it's not quite as, I suppose, exaggerated as a fully detached fly. What I'm going to do is create a like a detached body out of a bit of dubbing. So these dubbings here are super fine dry fly dubbings. You can buy these. Many brands produce these. I think these ones I've got here are Semperflea. The one I'm going to select is, well, I'll use two different ones typically for this fly. Either the pale orange colour, which seems to mimic very nice the natural egg laying abdomen of a female caddis in the evening, or this one here, which is a sort of tan colour, which has UV fibres in it. So it's got a UV flash to it, and that's what I tend to use for this fly. So I'll take a pinch of that. Because it's so fine, this dubbing, it means you can manipulate it really nicely. So I'm going to create a rope out of this by just pulling it and twisting it. So you can see by twisting it between your fingers, you can start to create a nice rope. The good thing about this dubbing is it's hydrophobic, because it's this dry fly dubbing. So it repels water and traps air really nicely. So it creates a really nice buoyant body for dry flies. So once I've got the material manipulated in the right way, what I'll do is I'll twist it very hard in one direction between the finger and the thumb. So it's creating a really tight twist, and then putting it together, you then the fibers then twist against each other to create a sort of twisted piece of rope. So it's looped round at the end and twisted round together. Not done that very well, so I'll try that again to get it a bit tighter. So you twist it between your fingers as tight as you can, and then you'll see that the two strands start to twist into each other, and that creates a nice sort of attached body part there, twisted together in a rope, and it holds together nicely. So I'll tie that in, so it extends just slightly beyond the bend of the hook. Now I'll tie it into halfway down the hook shank. So you've got this little bit here that's like a detached body of the fly. Okay, and then the next part of the body, let's go back to my old favourite squirrel dubbing. Pull off a pinch of dubbing. Twist it on there like that. And then just dub the rest of that body up towards the eye of the hook. There we go. You can use the dubbing brush just to make sure that it's not too lumpy and bumpy and it's the right profile, and it's always good to have little leggy bits sticking out. So that's the main body of the fly. This sort of detached ends created from the dubbing fibre, then a squirrel dubbing there, and then for the wing, CDC. I keep my CDC feathers in the last week's takeaway curry pot. Tends to they're much easier to get to than when they're in a packet, and you can also select the feathers much easier when they're sat in a box like this. So I'm going to choose
to grade them into small, medium, and large, Dave.
I do sometimes, Derek. I must admit, I haven't done with these. I tend to just pull them out one by one. These CDC feathers are again from Fish On. They're the premium CDC feathers, so they are supposed to have been graded before you buy them, so they're slightly more expensive than the standard ones, but they are noticeably better. And I these days I always pay the price for the bigger ones. So they're already graded, certainly into quality and approximate length. So you don't have to worry too much. So for this size, I'll take 2. Can use 3 if you want a bit of extra buoyancy. Line the 2 feathers up so they're sat right on top of each other equally there. In fact, I will put a 3rd one in on this one. There we go. So that's 3 nice CDC feathers, all lined up nice and equally. And then it's a case of creating a wing. This is an F-Fly style wing, which gives it that caddis profile, that roof-like wing over the back of the fly. I'll line it up so the wing is just slightly longer than the tip of the body. Don't want to go too far, maybe just a millimetre beyond. So just about right, and then tie those CDC feathers in at the head with a pinch and loop, and tying them in quite nice and tightly. So there's nothing worse than your CDC feathers dropping out after your first cast on the water. So again, advantage of the silk thread is you can really tie in those feathers very, very tightly without fear of the thread breaking. Then trim off the waist. I always keep my waist CDC because I can use it for either other caddis patterns as wings, but also for dubbing. It makes a lovely dubbing for some nymphs. So I'll keep that in a separate pot, and I'll use that for other things as well. So that's the wing put on there nicely over and above the squirrel, and that's extended dubbed body. And then finally, it's a case of just putting some more squirrel to create the head of the fly. This dubbing at the front here, I've selected some slightly longer, more spiky parts of the squirrel, so you can see there's, depending on where you take your fur, you can get quite fine bits. Then around the edges, you can get some quite long, spiky fibers. So for the head, I'll take a bunch of slightly more spiky fibers than I have done for the body, and then wind it round. And what I'm trying to do here is create the similar effect of a hackle. Some people would use a hackle there at the front of the fly. I don't with these caddis patterns, A, because it's quicker to do it this way, but B, if you can get these nice leggy fibers of the squirrel, they do look possibly more realistic than a stiff hackle at the front there. Don't be afraid to go on fairly thick with those as well initially, because once you've tied it off, you can remove excess fibers quite easily with your dubbing brush, and you can get it just right. Nothing worse than not putting enough squirrel dubbing on, and then you want to go in and pick a few out, and then you end up with it looking very bold. So if in doubt, put more on at this stage, and you can brush off the excess afterwards. So it's as simple as that. This fly, it's a case of just tying off the front there with your half hitch or your highly technical ballpoint pen. And then this is where you really make this fly come to life, is when you brush it up with the dubbing brush. Create that head. Make sure the wing is sitting nicely. Now this fly is really similar to, it's very similar to an F fly. It's very similar to a lot of the simple CDC caddis flies. The unique feature though that struck me about this was this creating this rope of dubbing for the abdomen, and it just stood out at me when I saw it. It looks like a really nice juicy looking body, and the fish do like it. It really does work effectively. Apparently this fly originated in Poland, on the competition scene in Poland. They are extremely effective anglers in Poland when it comes to competitive fly fishing. They call this fly the Polish Competition Caddis, and I've heard that it was their secret weapon until very recently, and it's pretty much the one dry fly that the Polish fly fishing team will use almost exclusively. They have so much faith in this fly that in different sizes they use it all the time. Read an article where a Polish angler was claiming that in a river he was fishing, it was very clear water, quite shallow. He could see the fish. He made a really bad cast. He ended up at 10 yards from the trout that he was trying to target. And apparently this trout spotted the fly and then moved 10 yards across the river to take it. So I've never experienced that before. But that's
a long way, isn't it, for a trout?
It is, isn't it? Yeah. That's how much faith the Polish have in this fly. The other thing I like about it is there's quite a lot of hook point that's exposed here as well. So I feel confident in using this fly and getting a good hook up. You know, the material is quite soft, so when a fish takes it, you can imagine that hook point there will easily penetrate the mouth and give you a good hookup. So you can see why the competition guys favour it. I can vouch for its success on local rivers. It first used it on the team last year on a summer evening, and it really worked well then, and it works brilliantly on the Onny and the River Clun and some of our other local rivers this time of year.
So what's the go-to size, Dave?
Sorry, Adam.
What's the go-to size?
The go-to size, I would say for me, on local rivers is size 16.
Yeah.
I would say there are many times I'll go smaller than that to a size 18, and it seems really small for a caddis, but quite often the caddis that you see hatching and fluttering around in the evenings on these smaller rivers are quite small. Having said that, a larger fly will provoke a hungry trout to grab it. So, you know, start off with a larger version.
Yeah.
The trout will often, you know, they'll often go for something that's bigger. But if that doesn't work, and sometimes it doesn't, sometimes the trout will just either completely ignore your fly, or you might get a few swirls at it, go smaller, and it 9 times out of 10 that will do the trick, even if you go right down to size 18.
Yeah, it's worth a try.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I thought I'd squeeze in one more for you guys. Another another dry for the rivers, which is a variation of a fly that's we probably all tie and use all the time. I mean, if I had to ask what's the most effective or go-to dry fly if you were going river fishing, what flies would you say?
Grey Duster,
Yeah.
Remo's Glory.
Adam's Parachute.
Yeah, you're getting there.
Klink.
Klinkhamer.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I can guarantee everybody always says Klinkhamer when you say that, and everyone's got their own versions of the Klinkhamer. There is, you know, there's always a lot of debate about, you know, anything with a parachute hackle people call a Klinkhamer, and it's not the original pattern that Hans created, and can't call anything that's not absolutely follows the original ingredients a Klinkhamer. So I'm not claiming this is a Klinkhamer. It's a Klinkhamer style fly. It's just, I guess, one that I've come up with that is both straightforward to tie and is functional to fish at the same time, and is successful and successful at different times of year as well. This is a fly that I'll fish all through the season. So for a hook, I've got a merger hook here. This is again fish on brand. That's what they call the merger hook. It's not the standard sort of Klinkhamer shaped hook, which has a really long shank and a fairly small gape. The reason I like this one is it's got a larger gape than the traditional Klinkhamer, so I do think you get a better hook hold because of it. This is size 14 in their range, and this is the standard size that I'll use for this fly. Don't tend to vary it too much. Again, it's yellow silk thread. Should have said actually earlier that this silk thread comes in 2 sizes. the standard size, which I tie most nymphs and larger dry flies with. It also comes in a fine size as well, which is slightly fewer fibers. Still very strong, but it's better for these smaller dry flies. So I use the fine gauge one for this one. Just tie that in there, and then major feature of the Klinkhamer style flies is the post. I'm going to use an orange, bright orange post here. It's a colour that I like to use for these because it's two reasons really. One, it's the colour that I seem to find most visible in most light conditions on the river. I also think that it is a colour that imitates more natural insects than the other colours. I know bright pink is favoured and it's really effective, and I just find that orange, quite a lot of insects, natural insects have orange hues in them. So it's visible, but it's also got a natural component to it as well. So this is ultra dry yarn. It's very similar to any other polypropylene yarn material you can get. This particular one's a bit thicker, a bit rougher, I suppose, and I find that means it's more buoyant. It's got air pockets inside it. It's really nice buoyant yarn material. So what I'll do is it comes in a strands that's twisted together. So what I do is I tease apart those strands to find the right thickness that I want for this particular fly. So you can pull that around, and that's about the thickness that I'm after. It's about half, just under half the total thickness of the rope. And this is how I tie the posts in on these Klinkhamer style flies. Sort of go back about 2 millimeters from the eye of the hook. What I'll do is I'll take that yarn and lie it over the top of the hook shank there, and I'll tie that thread with a pinch and loop, and then a few more turns very tightly. This is again why this silk thread's a real advantage. You can tie that in really tightly without bulking things up. So got that tied in across there, and then I'll lift up those two strands, bringing them together, and then a few turns either side just to lock it in, prevent it sliding up and down the hook shank. And then what I'll do is I will take the thread and twist it round, similar to how you would tie your parachute hackle in, around that thread, holding it up all the time, holding it together. And what that does, it creates that vertically positioned post, but it also keeps it really neat from the hook, and it creates a nice little base for tying in the hackle in later. So just trim off any of the long bits there so it's manageable. We'll leave that where it is now, won't worry about that for a while. And we'll take the thread down to the back of the fly, around the bend slightly, not too far. about there. And then for the body of the fly, unlike the standard Klinkhamer, which uses like a grey or other colours dubbing material, what I'm using is a feather. This is a goose feather, which I picked up on a riverbank somewhere, or by the side of a lake. It's really nice material to use, as is pheasant tail. Goose feathers are quite buoyant in their fibres. Go to any park, you can grab yourself a handful of these feathers. Take a bunch of those, holding the thick cut end. Going to tie them in by the thin end. Just beyond the bend, and then tying all that in, coming right all the way back now to where the post is. Okay. Then you've just got to watch these goose feathers because they are quite brittle, so you'll often get them snapping off. But one way to help with that, first of all, is to just wet them slightly, and then secondly, just twist them gently, similar to how you would do with pheasant tail. Not too tightly, just a little bit, and it just sort of improves their strength when you now come up through the body. So now creating touching turns with these fibres. Don't worry if you leave a little bit of a gap between those turns. It just helps give that segmented illusion to the body. Right up to the post. Now you can tie that feather off just around the side of that feather post there. It doesn't really matter where you tie it off. Trim off the waist as close as you can. There we go. And then to reinforce those feathers, but without adding the weight that you would do if you put a wire rib in there, you create extra weight. Extra weight is not a great idea for dry flies that you're looking to keep in the surface. So what I'll do is I'll take this silk thread and I'll run it in wide open turns down the body to the end, and then create a few turns at the end there with this silk thread as a sort of butt. The silk thread is really tough. Trout's teeth will have a really hard job in cutting through it, so it forms a really strong ribbing material. So just sort of seal the end there with a bit of thread, and then going back up the body a little bit more carefully to create a ribbed effect in open even turns as you go up really tight. And that's just a simple way of creating that body of the fly there. And then the thorax, the original Klinkhamer used peacock herl for the thorax. You can use that if you like. I'm going to use a substitute dubbing. This is Hen's Spectra number 46. It is the green peacock Spectra dubbing. So dub that in. Then starting just behind the post, wind in that thorax. You're looking to create that sort of slightly bulbous thorax profile, which I do believe is a trigger. Triggers a feeding response in the trout when they see that in the surface. And then we need a hackle. So I'm using a grizzle cock hackle. Find one of a suitable length. This is quite an important bit because you don't want a hackle that's too long because it doesn't look natural, but then you don't want it too short because you want that buoyancy and that surface area of the fly. So getting the hackle right is just, it is worth taking a bit of time to select your feather. So just bear with me. I've probably taken all the feathers of this size from this cape already, so finding the any remaining ones can be quite tricky.
Somebody got a clock ticking away in the background.
I
Mine again.
think it's telling me something.
My pacemaker, Derek.
Your pacemaker.
Let me know.
There we go. I think it's telling me something, Derek. It's saying, come on, get on with it. I need to get myself a new grizzle cape. I've had most of the feathers for this size hook. That'll do. That'll do. It's just about the right length. So yeah, strip off the fibers you don't want, so you've got some plenty nice stiff fibers to use. And this is really crucial for my version. I make sure that the hackle is tied in upside down, as it were. So you turn it so the curved side goes downwards. I know some people do it the other way, which is probably standard. You know, the upper face pointing upwards. I just find that if you do it like that, that the fibers sit that in the water, and it just creates holds the surface tension of the water a little bit better than if it was the other way. So tie that in tightly just around the post there. Cut the stalk. And then for this bit, I tend to find using your fingers rather than hackle pliers is useful, because it means you can keep that feather oriented in the right way, rather than if it starts to twist over, you can just sort of manipulate it with your fingers. And if you've got a long hackle, you can do it quite easily. So start winding around the post. Once you've been around one or two times, it tends to hold in position nicely. What I'm doing is each time I go round, I'm going underneath the last turn. So I'm twisting, I'm turning that in a downwards direction. And when I go round, I'm pulling the post in the opposite direction. So it's allowing me to turn each turn of that hackle underneath the previous one. Sometimes helps if you orientate the hook in a slightly different direction. Some people like to do it on its side. I find I'm okay with it stood up like this, but you can experiment to what's easiest. And I'll do quite a few turns for this fly, particularly if I'm going to use it as a fly to fish with a nymph using the duo method, because the more turns of hackle you've got there, the more grip you've got in the surface film. It does seem to make a difference. If you were fishing it as a dry fly on its own, I'd probably use fewer turns of hackle to make it a bit more sparse and realistic. But quite often I'll be using this as a fly with a nymph, with a duo setup, and it just gives. If you do 6 turns of hackle, it just seems to give it a little bit more longer term buoyancy. So that's it there, tied in nice and tight, and then go round with the thread underneath the hackle, locking it in around the post 4 times. And then you can trim off that excess end of the hackle. You got a nice parachute hackle there, tied in upside down, so the fibers are pointing slightly up. And then it's a case of a few turns behind the eye of the hook and your whip finish, or pen trick, as I prefer. Doing a whip finish on some of these parachute flies is a bit of a pain because you tend to get stuck with all these hackles, whereas if you're going with the pen, you can get underneath those hackles, push everything back, and everything's nice and neat. So that's the basic dressing done. What we do now is we trim the post to the right length. What I tend to do as a rule of thumb here is keep the post about the same length as the radius of the hackle, the parachute hackle. So about there is fine. I know some people that use these for fishing the duo often have really thick, long posts on them there, which makes them ideal for as indicators, but not convinced they're good fish catchers. What I insist on is, if I'm fishing the duo method, the dry fly has got to be a catcher. And a lot of the time when I'm duo fishing, it's actually targeting fish in the dry fly as opposed to the nymph and using it as an indicator. If you're going to fish nymphs, if you think the fish are on nymphs, it's much more effective to use standard nymphing methods than the duo. So then you can turn the fly over, have a look at it. Any stray bits of hackle, trim off, so you've got a really nice clean underside to that fly. I think the success of this fly is the fact you've got so much of the body sits underneath the water. It just proves irresistible to the fish. So that's my version of what we call the Klinkhamer. That's the way I tie the post. It's the way I tie the hackle. Be interesting to get people's comments on how they tie theirs, whether there are improvements that we can make on this one, or any extra tips.
Yeah, that definitely works.
Nice fly.
Find that you have trouble putting the leader in the eye of the hook in that position with a bushy sort of wing hackle.
Yeah, not really. I don't know if I can get more of a close-up shot here. I've left quite a bit of that eye exposed, and there's a lot of exposure there. And the other thing about this hook is it's got a really big eye. It's got quite a large eye. So threading this, I find, not as difficult as some of the other. In fact, it's that this caddis that I tied earlier. I find that to be more of a problem really, because that dubbing sometimes goes around the eye of the hook, and it's a slightly smaller eye, whereas this it looks like it's covering it, but you can easily move that back, and then once you do that, the eye becomes quite exposed.
A colleague of mine, friend of mine, used to, before he cut the post off, used to separate the hackle over the eye and bring it down and tie it in behind the eye, you know, creating a V at the front, so you didn't have a complete halo of hackle.
Right. Yeah, I've never seen that before. That's a good idea. Yeah.
I must admit, this late colleague of mine was in correspondence with Hans when they developed it back in the sort of the 90s.
Yeah.
And of course, Hans ended up by taking all the credit and the glory for it and publishing before he could.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Also, at the beginning, you know, you tied the post on the top.
Yeah.
You used to tie it in underneath, which helped to give the bit more of a body to the abdomen before you actually sort of tied the post.
Yes, yeah. It creates like a little. It helps the tapered profile, doesn't it? That's the other way you can do it, and you can cut it diagonally, so you get that underbody tapered look. I used to do it like that. I've just recently used this method. In fact, it was a video online. It was John Pearson again, the chap who developed this caddis pattern. Do rate John as a really good functional fly tire, and he was using this method. And I just started using it. I think bit quicker than trying to tie it in the other way.
The other trick he used to use was putting in the hackle. He used to use two feathers that were in opposition to each other. So where you got yours curving upwards, he had another one on top of that curving downwards.
Oh, right.
To give extra buoyancy in rougher waters.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's a good tip.
It's just as easy to put a few more turns in.
I'll try that, Tony. I'll give that a go. I've never tried tying a second hackle in that one.
Used to call it a monster munch.
It's gone awfully quiet.
What size nymph would he hold up then, Dave?
He'll hold up one of these, Adam. 3 mil.
Oh, wow, no problem.
I wouldn't try anything heavier, but it doesn't have any problem with that.
I think having the hackle the wrong way up there makes a hell of a difference. So it sits on the water there, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah. I used to tie it the other way around, and used to always have a problem with, after a while it would start sinking, or in certain currents, it wouldn't. Yeah. I found and I was a bit skeptical about whether that would make much of a difference, really, but it does seem to hold it up better. I'm really interested to try Tony's suggestion though about putting the extra hackle in on top and seeing whether that makes that bit of difference, because they still do sink, after a while. which is probably why some people like to go for those much bigger ones with the more like bungs than dry flies. But I still prefer a fly that catches fish than
Yes.
just an indicator.
You'd have it on a dropper though. You wouldn't use New Zealand style with it, would
No,
you?
no, absolutely not. No, I don't like the New Zealand style is flawed.
Well,
think.
it is. Yeah, I don't like it.
It's a compromise, isn't it? I mean, you got better sensitivity, better detection on the nymph, I suppose, if you've got a direct connection.
Yeah.
Terrible if you've got fish taking the dry fly, and I don't like fishing the duo as a nymphing method, as it were.
No.
You can have the dropper really short though. You can have it, less than an inch or so, but it's the fact you've got it tethered at the back, which is the problem when it comes to hooking those fish.
Yeah. So.
Well, thanks for tonight, Dave.
Yes, it's been very good.
Well, I hope it's been interesting, and it's been a real pleasure. And as always, I've learned something and picked up some tips, which is really great. So yeah, thanks for comments, thanks for tips, and if there's anything else you want to pass on, the WhatsApp group is there. So yeah, I'll be keen to get any more comments from people.
Could you photograph them and put them on the WhatsApp group for us, please, Dave?
Yeah, I will do, Derek. Yeah.
Magic.
And I'm going to be in the Unicorn in October, isn't it?
Yeah, 6th of October.
Yeah.
Jill's birthday.
Thank
I'll
you,
bring a
Dave.
cake, Derek.
Great evening. Thank you. Bye all.
Bye now.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
many thanks from me and the clock. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Yeah. Good night, each.
Good night, everyone. Thanks again, David. It was a lovely session.
An absolute pleasure, Derek. Thanks for inviting me.
Cheers, Dave.
Cheers.
Take care, guys.